Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Trump is refusing to acknowledge Joe Biden as the president-elect, even as his efforts to delay election results were dealt a blow in two battlegrounds earlier. Last night in Michigan, Republican canvassers in the populous Wayne County initially blocked the move to certify election results. They raised concerns about mismatches in the numbers submitted by local precincts and those tallied in the final canvass. President Trump praised the move, saying on Twitter, quote, "Having courage is a beautiful thing." But those canvassing board members Meanwhile, the president suffered another loss in a different battleground. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled a Trump campaign ballot processing observer had no right to oversee the Philadelphia vote count. Despite repeated losses by the Trump campaign in court, the public's confidence in a fair election is being undermined. A new poll from Monmouth University shows 60% of the country is very or somewhat confident the election was fair and accurate. But among only the voters who supported the president, more than 80% say they're not confident in the results. Meanwhile, there's been significant movement on the development of a coronavirus vaccine. Pfizer has submitted new data showing theirs is 95% effective. But as vaccine development moves fast, the virus is spreading even faster. CBS News has obtained a White House coronavirus task force report. The document shows 47 states are now in what's known as the red zone for new cases. In it, the task force calls the spread of the virus aggressive and unrelenting. Ed O'Keefe and Asma Khalid join me now. Ed is a CBS News political correspondent. He's following President-elect Biden in Delaware. And Asma is a political correspondent for NPR and co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. Welcome to you both. Ed, let me begin with you. It has been nearly a week since President Trump last spoke publicly, and he's taken no questions since the election. What is President-elect Biden doing while he awaits approval to begin the official transition process?
Well, good to be with you, Elaine. Among other things, we know that the president-elect is beginning to start to figure out who else should be in senior positions across his administration. We are expecting, perhaps before Thanksgiving, another round of announcements about senior White House officials, not necessarily cabinet secretaries, but others who will occupy key posts in the Biden administration and occupy offices in the West Wing or the adjoining Eisenhower Executive Office building. Folks like the budget director, the national security advisor, his economic advisors, perhaps his communications shop as well. Those matter less to most Americans than the cabinet positions, which we're told are still a few weeks off in many cases as he continues to mull his options. Beyond that, he held a really interesting and somewhat emotional virtual conversation today with nurses who are on the front lines of this pandemic across the country. Hearing from a school nurse, a firefighter, another nurse from Minnesota, who emotionally, tearfully recounted a lot of the trouble that she and her colleagues have had in not only looking after each other, but in dealing with so many ill and dying patients. At one point, she broke into tears, and Biden wiped away tears and admitted that he too was becoming emotional listening to her describe the situation. In many ways, being confronted, at least virtually, face to face, by the crisis that he's going to inherit now in about 60 days or so. So there are public elements of what he's doing by holding these virtual events from the Queen Theater here in Wilmington, Delaware, a place that they've adopted as kind of his public home. And then we know there's a lot of conversations going on behind the scenes with top aides about who should work in the Biden administration. And then some of the calls continue with world leaders and Democratic leaders. Just a little while ago, they said that Biden phoned Speaker Pelosi to congratulate her on being reelected as head of the House Democratic Caucus. There really was no contest there, but sort of acknowledging that the two of them will be working together far more closely come January.
Well, Asma, how is President-elect Biden trying to coordinate the country's coronavirus response when his team has been denied access by the Trump White House?
That is certainly a challenge, and it's a challenge that the president-elect himself, acknowledged today. As Ed was saying, he had this virtual roundtable with a lot of listening to frontline workers. But at one point, at the end of the conversation, he told them that one of the biggest challenges they face right now is the fact that they haven't yet officially gotten a green light from the GSA. And as a result of that, he and his team have not been able to coordinate with current public health officials. He pointed out that in two sort of key areas, that's a problem. One is they don't have a clear sense of the stockpile of personal protective equipment. But secondly, and perhaps just as important, he said that they're not privy to any of the vaccine deployment plans, which, we've just gotten word in the last, I would say, week or so, right, of two very promising COVID-19 vaccines. But Biden acknowledged, today that the country could see a slowdown in actually ensuring that as many people as possible are vaccinated if he and his team cannot coordinate with the Trump team. And as of now, they have not been able to do that. And so those are very real concerns. We've certainly heard from members of Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden's COVID task force, who have told us at NPR, they've told other news outlets that this has been quite a problem for them. I mean, Biden himself, to me, was extraordinarily blunt earlier this week when he was asked about what the biggest challenge is of this delayed, uncoordinated transition. And he said that he worries more people could die. I mean, it was just sort of, I think, really the most stark recognition from Biden himself of what the potential consequences of this all could be.
Yeah, it really underscores the need to kind of coordinate just logistically when you were talking about trying to vaccinate millions and millions of people. Ed, does the Trump legal strategy appear to be focused on actually winning these cases or just delaying a bit until the Electoral College votes December 14th?
It looks as if, Elaine, this is more about delaying and sort of just muddying the waters at this point. None of these cases has gone anywhere of any note over the course of the last 2 weeks or so, whether it's in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, and Nevada, and other parts of the country. Outside of the recounts that he requested or that he's supporting in places like Georgia, one that he may be pushing for now in Wisconsin, there really is, it appears, very little that he can do to try to reverse the results or try to raise concerns that something nefarious of a coordinated degree was going on. Even this situation last night in Wayne County, Michigan, where the two Republican elections officials voted against certifying the results and then reversed course, I think was a signal that Republicans across the country are going to face and do face public pressure to just move on and to raise concerns if there are relevant ones and ones that deserve scrutiny, as they decided to do in Wayne County by turning it over to the Secretary of State to review, but to also just certify the results and get on with it. And I think, we have not seen a large public outcry in a coordinated way in state capitals or anything yet. Maybe we will see that as we get closer to when electors are supposed to meet and vote and certify the winners. But there doesn't seem to be this large coordinated Republican effort necessarily to help the president sort this out in a legal way. There seems to be a better, more coordinated effort to figure out who's going to win those Georgia Senate seats. And we've seen both parties now start to organize and mobilize for those contests on January 5th.
Right. Well, Ed, the Trump campaign has put down $3 million to seek a partial recount in Wisconsin. Where are they focusing those efforts in Wisconsin, and why not request a statewide recount?
Milwaukee County and Dane County, Wisconsin are the two places where they are requesting that recount. You might think to yourself, okay, Milwaukee, that makes sense. It's a big Democratic area, biggest city in the state. Dane County, where's that? That's Madison, Wisconsin, the state capital, another Democratic stronghold. And the reason why they're only focused on those two counties, the Trump campaign said, quote, they are the locations with the worst irregularities, unquote. But county officials in both of those jurisdictions said there's nothing to this. And if you'd like to hold a recount in the two Democratic dominant district or counties in the state, go right ahead. It's not necessarily going to turn up something that changes the results or, again, finds some allegation or proves an allegation of widespread fraud or coordination of some kind against the president. So we'll see. It is expensive. It's not the full state, which would have been far more expensive and expansive. But again, they are doing this to sort of prolong the process and make the inevitable perhaps just a little more messy. And at the same time that this is happening, just think about this. There are Trump supporters whose support for, whose belief in, whose trust in the electoral process is being eroded, and who will wonder, as he takes office, whether Joe Biden is indeed the legitimately elected president. And if that's the goal, well, so be it, but I don't see how that necessarily is beneficial to Trump in the long term unless he's convinced that doing all these things now could potentially help him or Republicans down the line in 22 with the midterm elections and in 2024 should he opt to run again.
And Asma, to follow up on what Ed is saying there, we heard in the intro about this steep drop in faith in the election results from Trump voters. What are those potential longer-term impacts of President Trump's undermining of the American electoral system?
Elaine, to me, that is perhaps the most important question, regardless. As Ed has said, this is inevitable that Vice President Joe Biden is the president-elect at this point in time, and it is inevitable that he will take office eventually. But the sort of questions that the Trump team has tried to pose in the democratic process, the allegations of fraud, again, albeit not accurate, but the allegations that they have tried to make, I think, do pose substantial problems around the future of democracy. I mean, these are questions that I will say I began to hear about even during the 2016 election process. I mean, there were definitely simmerings of this, but I think they have become a lot more potent now in the 2020 election. And the question really is, what is the end goal for the president? Because ultimately, is it really to just sow additional seeds of doubt in the integrity of the election? Fine, but then who really wins in that process? And does that not pose additional problems for sort of the health of democracy, not just in a future presidential election, but frankly, even just looking at the 2022 midterms?
Absolutely. And really just opening up these questions that I think for many Americans who are already just exhausted, whether it's COVID news, whether it's election news, a lot of Americans really sort of on edge to see what happens just 63 days out now from Inauguration Day. All right, Ed O'Keefe and Asma Khalid, wonderful to see you both. Thank you very much.